Some say that the 17th century ended with the death of one man, and that man was Carlos II, the last king of the Spanish Habsburg line. He was so frail and weak that people considered his survival beyond childhood a miracle. And as he grew weaker and weaker, Spain's neighbors began to eye the Spanish throne like vultures circling a dying animal. But Carlos II still had one last trick up his sleeve, and it left everyone in a dilemma. What was it? Let's find out. In the latter part of Carlos II's reign, all of Europe was suffering from wars. In Western Europe, the 9 Years' War was fought. That war started when France, allied with the Ottoman Empire, invaded Pfalz in 1687. In response, all of Europe formed an anti-French alliance. France boasted the strongest military power of the time, and also had many famous generals. For example, the Viscount of Turenne and the Duke of Condé were generals who made all of Europe tremble during the 30 Years' War. And during the reign of Louis XIV, this line of generals continued. Marquis de Vauban was an expert in fortifications, making the territories he captured virtually impregnable. This prevented deep invasions into French territory, even when France suffered significant defeats. Marquis de Louvois is called the father of the French army. He established a systematic and tactically perfect military. Duke of Tolaar was an outstanding field commander, following in the footsteps of Generals Turenne and Condé. It was said that there was no one who could defeat him on the battlefield. But, as strong as France was, it couldn't win on every front. In northern Italy, France held the advantage. But along the Rhine and in Flanders, they had to endure grueling battles. The longer the war dragged on, the more France was at a disadvantage. Louis XIV's most formidable opponent was William III, also called William of Orange, who was the King of England and ruler of the Netherlands. William III was a son of Princess Mary, who was the daughter of King Charles I of England. Mary had been married off to William II, Prince of Orange, in the early years of the English Civil War. Later, after the restoration of the Stuart monarchy and return of Charles II, William III married his first cousin, also named Mary, who was the daughter of his maternal uncle James, who would later succeed Charles II as James II. Then, later, William took the English throne in a coup against James II, and James had fled to France. Louis supported the Jacobites, who fought to restore James to the throne. William constantly harassed Louis along the Flanders border. Throughout the 9 Years' War, William would return to England in winter, only to raise another army and invade France again when the weather warmed up. He wasn't generally regarded as an outstanding military strategist, but he was relentless and persistent. Louis XIV was exasperated by William, who kept coming back no matter how many times he was defeated. As the war dragged on, the French force was also getting thinner. This prolonged struggle made King Louis realize that William was not an easy opponent. After the Namur fortress, a key stronghold in the Spanish Netherlands, fell to William's assault, Louis saw no point in keeping the war going and requested peace. The exhausted anti-French allies agreed, leading to the signing of the Treaty of Ryswick. Under this treaty, France had to return all the territories it had recently occupied, including Luxembourg and Pfalz. So, in the end, France gained nothing from the war. Louis was utterly disappointed at this outcome. He had been confident that he could take Pfalz, but now he realized that France alone could not defeat all of Europe. To make matters worse, news arrived that General Eugene of Savoy had decisively defeated the Ottoman Turks at the Battle of Zenta. It seemed that nothing was going right for King Louis that year. Louis had consistently refused to recognize William III as the King of England, but after the 9 Years' War, he had no choice but to recognize William's kingship. But there was a silver lining too. Ottoman Empire managed to survive even after it was crushed by Eugene of Savoy, and it continued to act as the check against the Habsburgs. Another upside was that France cemented its status as an unrivaled superpower of Europe. France didn't secure a victory, but it showed everyone that it was capable of waging war against so many nations simultaneously, and this show of force had a significant impact on Spain. Many Spanish nobles became pro-French, and the war played a crucial role in this shift. After 9 years of war, France and all other nations were utterly exhausted. Meanwhile, England's international standing was quietly climbing as it teamed up with the Netherlands. England had become a country no one could ignore, and William III played a significant role in this. After the 9 Years' War, a brief period of peace followed. But soon, troubling news came out of Spain. Carlos II's health was rapidly deteriorating. He had no heirs, yet Spain's territories, including its colonies, were vast. Depending on who would succeed Carlos II, it would drastically alter the balance of power in Europe. In a previous video, we explained the succession crisis following Carlos II. Although Emperor Leopold was in a weaker position after the death of his grandson from Margarita Teresa's line, he himself was still a valid heir as a grandson of Felipe III of Spain, because his mother, Maria Anna of Spain, was a daughter of Felipe III. So ultimately, the heirs were the children of Louis XIV and Emperor Leopold I. Initially, Louis XIV wanted to avoid another war, so instead of insisting on the succession rights outright, he was willing to compromise. He was willing to give up the claims to the Spanish throne in exchange for the valuable territories of Naples, Sicily, and possibly Milan. The most intense negotiations were conducted not with Leopold, but with William III. After much difficulties, the surrounding countries reached an agreement, but a problem arose. Carlos II refused to accept any solution that would divide Spain's territories. This meant any agreement reached between Louis and William was now useless, and France and Austria would be forced into a winner-takes-all contest. Initially, Leopold's son Karl was the favorite, but soon many shifted their support to France. Among the nobles, there was a belief that, if Spain had to be handed over to a foreign ruler, it should ally with stronger France to better protect Spain's territories and colonies. As a result, Louis XIV's grandson, Philippe, emerged as the leading candidate. But this was a development that neighboring countries couldn't tolerate, even if it meant going to war, and the ailing Carlos II came up with one last brilliant idea. He declared that Philippe could inherit the Spanish throne and all its territories, but under no circumstances could he also become the King of France. Philippe was the second son of the Grand Dauphin Louis. He was chosen as the King of Spain because he wasn't the first in line to inherit the French throne. The Grand Dauphin Louis had 3 sons, the eldest, Louis, Duke of Burgundy, the second, Philippe, Duke of Anjou, and the youngest, Charles, Duke of Berry. The eldest son, Louis, was excluded from the Spanish succession because he was the heir to the French throne. The plan was that if something happened to Philippe, the Spanish throne would go to the youngest son, Charles, Duke of Berry. Louis XIV carefully considered this proposal. Carlos II choosing the Duke of Anjou as his heir was excellent news for King Louis. But he knew Austria would never accept it, and that meant war against Austria was inevitable. Moreover, the idea of having to keep the 2 countries separate seemed less appealing the more he thought about it. The benefits were small, while the burdens seemed large. It was the Grand Dauphin Louis who stepped in. He insisted that France should accept Spanish throne for Philippe. From his perspective, his son becoming the King of Spain was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. He fully expected to become the King of France after Louis XIV, and then the 2 kingdoms will be ruled by father and son. Under his son's pressure, Louis XIV eventually agreed. The Habsburgs, of course, vehemently opposed this decision, but the condition Carlos II had put on the succession gave room to other countries to consider. Although the Bourbon family would take over Spain, the stipulation that the kingdoms would remain forever divided gave other powers in Europe some reassurance. It's true that France and Spain would be closely aligned, while Louis XIV and the Grand Dauphin are alive. But after that, the two kingdoms would be ruled by brothers, and the two separate lines will inevitably drift apart. William III also struggled with this decision, but was leaning toward accepting it. In the meantime, Carlos II's condition was deteriorating rapidly. For years, his wife, Maria Anna of Neuburg, held the power at the Spanish court, supported by her advisors from Pfalz. The Spanish nobles resented these foreigners, who seemed more interested in their own gain than in Spain's welfare. As for Maria Anna, she desperately tried to prevent Philippe from becoming the King of Spain, hoping to secure the throne for a successor from the Holy Roman Empire. That outcome would secure her position and influence even after Carlos's death. But, in the end, it was the pro-French faction, led by the Archbishop of Toledo, that won. They managed to persuade Carlos to name Philippe as his heir. Shortly after making this decision, Carlos's condition worsened. He was in constant pain and could no longer eat. And he finally passed away just days before his 39th birthday. When his body was autopsied, the doctors were shocked. His heart was so small, it was almost invisible. His lungs were severely damaged, his intestines were necrotic, and his skull was filled with fluid, indicating that he had suffered from hydrocephalus. It is heartbreaking to realize that he had endured a lifetime with such a body. He really shouldn't have been able to survive, but he clung to life, determined to fulfill his duties as king. It must have taken an incredible amount of willpower. 2 weeks after Carlos II's death, Philippe of France was proclaimed King of Spain on November 16, 1700, as Philippe V. At just 17 years old, Philippe had to carefully select a large entourage and the advisors who would help him govern Spain. During the transition, the Archbishop of Toledo served as regent, while the pro-French nobles quickly ousted the widowed queen, Maria Anna, from power. Maria Anna fought fiercely to maintain her influence and to secure her future. She ensured that Carlos's will included a provision granting her a substantial pension. She even suggested to France that she, now widowed, should marry the new young king, Philippe. She argued that her deep knowledge of Spain would make her an ideal partner to support the new king. This proposal was met with disdain in France. From their perspective, there was no reason to elevate the now powerless former queen, especially one with such a poor reputation. And France had no goodwill toward Maria Anna, because she had consistently opposed France and aligned herself with the electorates in the Holy Roman Empire during her time as queen. Nonetheless, Maria Anna expected she would at least be well treated with respect, as befitting the Dowager Queen. But soon, Maria Anna was informed that Philippe, now known as Felipe V, ordered her to vacate her residence in Madrid before his arrival. Furious, Maria Anna protested, arguing that Carlos's will guaranteed the right to reside in any city she wanted, in addition to her pension. Philippe simply ignored her objections, and threatened her with severe consequences if she didn't leave. Maria Anna had no choice but to flee to Toledo, where she took up residence in the Alcazar. Her troubles didn't end there. Felipe V decided that her pension was excessively large, and drastically reduced it. Maria Anna couldn't keep up her lavish lifestyle with the reduced pension, and began pleading with her family and Pfalz for financial support. She had high hopes of being able to maintain her status, so her bitterness was intense. The Spanish people mocked and ridiculed her downfall. Meanwhile, in France, now that a Bourbon prince had ascended to the Spanish throne, Louis XIV had one very important thing to do, and that was to reassure other countries in Europe that France is not planning to annex Spanish territories. But unfortunately, King Louis did not feel the need to do so. He felt that, notwithstanding his grandson becoming King of Spain, he had suffered significant losses himself. This attitude led him to make a series of blunders. First, Louis made the mistake of retaining Philippe in the line of succession to the French throne. Given that Louis had one son and 3 grandsons, he had to consider the possibility that if all of them died, Philippe would need to return to France. Louis assumed that if Philippe had to leave Spain, another prince could be sent to replace him. To Louis, this would be a natural course of things, but he kept this idea to himself, and did not explain it to other countries. So the other countries suspected that Louis was planning to eventually annex Spain to France, by leaving the door open for Philippe to also inherit France. Another mistake was Louis's greed for the slave trade. After sending Philippe to Spain, Louis publicly announced that France would monopolize the slave trade in the West Indies. This was a provocative move, especially to English and Dutch merchants. Louis also made the mistake of challenging the English throne. During the 9 Years' War, Louis had grudgingly recognized William III as the rightful king of England. But then, in 1701, after the death of James II, Louis inexplicably declared James's son, James Francis Edward, as the legitimate king of England. This declaration was a blatant provocation that left England with no choice but to declare war. So, now the stage is set for another war between France and its neighbors, and it was another mistake he made almost 20 years ago that really came back to bite him. What was that mistake? We will find out in our next video. So please like and subscribe to continue receiving our stories from history. It really helps a small channel like us